Yeah. Welcome, everyone. My name is Steve Wynn. I'm the treasurer of the Hampshire Bird Club board. And on behalf of the Ed Committee, we welcome you to tonight's presentation. I want to welcome both Hampshire Bird Club members, and I think we had some people signed up from the Allen and Hoffman Bird Clubs as well. Jim Lafley is a longtime member of the Hampshire Bird Club. He's the field trip coordinator and also a board member, and of course, an expert birder. We're delighted that he's willing to offer this workshop for us again, and those of you who are considering being feeder watchers for the Christmas bird count may find this especially helpful. If any of you want more information about how to be part of the Christmas bird count, which takes place on December 18th this year, email CBC, Christmas bird count, CBC, at hampshirebirdclub.org. If you have any questions for Jim, please either save them until the end or when Jim asks for questions throughout the presentation, or put them on the chat. And there are a couple of times Jim is going to pause for questions. Is that right, Jim?
Yep.
Great. All right. Thanks, Jim Lafley.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to talk about feeders first for about 4 or 5 slides, the different feeders that I use, and explain why I use those feeders and the feed that I put in them. And then I'll take a break and people can ask me questions about feeders, and then I'll get into the feeder birds after that. So that we will have a little break there right after the feeder part of the presentation. Oop. So, share screen. There we go. Okay. Let me see here. All right. So I use tube feeders, and I use black oil sunflower seeds in the tube feeders. And some of my tube feeders have that little plastic tray that you see at the bottom. Mainly I put that on because there are birds that like to feed in that tray, and you'll see some of those throughout the show. The other thing I do with my tube feeders is I do a parfait of white millet and black oil sunflower. I find that a lot of the sparrows and ground feeding birds, mourning doves, really like the millet to be on the ground. But what this does is it keeps it dry, and as the finches and chickadees and titmice throw the millet onto the ground, they're feeding the other birds. And so it makes a nice combination. I only use black oil sunflower and millet, though, in my tube feeders. I don't use any other seeds. I also have 2 tray feeders. The green one is now on a separate post, and the other one that's underneath the green one is on its own right now. So I do have 2 tray feeders. One of them's covered, one of them's not. It's an open tray feeder. On the tray feeders, I'll use black oil sunflower and also dried mealworms. The bluebirds and a number of other birds like the dried mealworms in the wintertime. I also put out suet. I have 3 different suet cages. This one is wired. There's a wire around the tree with a hook on it. I hang that one out there. This one here has a web belt that I ran through it, and I snap that on there. The reason I have these hanging and belted around the tree is I do take them in at night up until about December 15th. I find that after December 15th, which is what Mass Wildlife recommends, we don't have bears in our yard anyway until about early to mid-March. And so if I'm feeding after mid-March, I bring the feeders in at night. And this web belt with the snap on it makes it easy to take it off the tree and bring it inside. Same thing with the hook on the tree. I just have to take it off the hook that's wrapped around the tree. And I do in the wintertime, I also snap suet feeder onto the clothesline outside. And the other tube feeder that I put out is, I have two thistle or Niger seed feeders, and they're really good for goldfinches, some other finches, and especially some winter finches. So I get a lot of the real common birds at my feeder. Oh, let me, does anybody have any feeder questions?
Jim, there are no questions in the chat.
Okay. All right. So I get a lot of the common birds, mourning dove, great ground feeder. Occasionally we'll get on the trays, but mostly you'll feed on the ground. And they really like black oil sunflower and, like I said, the white millet as well. Those are the two main seeds that I use. The woodpeckers will come to the thistle. They'll also go to the black oil sunflower. So they do like black oil sunflower as well. And I use black oil now because it's really a high fat content compared to the striped sunflower. And I generally don't use the mixes because they have a lot of seeds in them that I find the birds don't eat, like red millet. And there's some others. Safflower is supposed to be pretty good, but those mixes don't have as much of the black oil sunflower in them, which I find the birds really prefer. I also get downy woodpeckers. The male downy that with the little red on the back of its head has is sitting on the power line of my house for some reason. And the female is at the feeder. Downy woodpeckers, when I was learning birds, the instructors I had said Downy's bill is about half the length of its head. And you can see it's got that little delicate bill compared to the head. So if you see it and you get a good view of it, if you can kind of get an idea of how long the bill is relative to the head. And if you look at a hairy woodpecker, the bill is about as long as the head. So it's a very massive bill. It's a larger bird, but sometimes if they're far away in a tree, it's hard to tell. But the bill length on a hairy is about the length of its head. So it's a good way to tell. They're also really noisy compared to the downies. I get pileated woodpeckers occasionally at my feeders. They really go through the suet quickly. They're very large birds. They eat quite a bit when they're there. And all of these pictures were taken in my backyard at my feeders. One of the birds that likes the tray feeders and also occasionally gets on a tube feeder, though they have trouble because they're so large, are blue jays. And if they're around in the wintertime, some winters we don't have as many as other winters, but if they're around in the wintertime, you need to be ready to go through a lot of seed because they'll take 8 or 10 seeds at a time, fly away, and then they'll come back and take 8 or 10 more. They're really a lot of heavy feeders. American crows are the same way. They'll eat a lot. They don't get on the tube feeders, but they'll get on the tray feeders and on the ground. And I find the crows come early in the morning. If I get up before sunrise or right at sunrise, sometimes I'll find a few of them in the yard. But generally, if the sun's been up for an hour or more, they just aren't around the yard. So if you want to see the crows at your feeder, you need to get up very early, or you can hear them also very early. One thing I like about black-capped chickadees, tufted titmice, and white-breasted nuthatches is they'll grab a seed, they'll fly off to a bush or a tree nearby, and they'll whack away at the seed to get at the meat inside. and they'll drop the shell off somewhere else. And so they'll come back and forth. If you get a quick glimpse of a small bird at your feeder, you just keep watching and they'll come back and they'll grab another seed and you'll get a good view of them. But they are very quick about their selection, and then they'll take off. It really spreads out those black oil sunflower husks, so they don't all collect underneath your feeder. And again, relative of the black-capped chickadee, the tufted titmouse does the same kind of thing, grabs that seed in its bill and then flies off to a nearby tree. And these are very common birds year-round in my yard. Sometimes I'll end up with just a pair of blackcaps and a pair of tufted titmice during the breeding season, but in the wintertime, they'll come in as a flock. So I might get 5 to 6 chickadees and the same number of titmice. So they'll flock to the feeder in the wintertime. White-breasted nuthatch, same thing. They'll fly to the feeder. They will, all three of those, the chickadee, the titmouse, and the white-breasted nuthatch, really like the black oil sunflower. It's a real high fat content for the amount of effort they have to put in. If you want to be, I guess, even kinder to the birds, you could get black oil sunflower without the husks on them. So you get the ones that are just the meat. It's an expensive way to go, but you don't end up with those black husks all over your lawn. And the birds don't have to work very hard. They can just grab it, take it, and start eating it right away. They don't need to open it up in order to eat it. So it's a lot more efficient for them, and they get a lot more energy from it, from the amount of energy they have to expend to eat the seed. Again, this is one of the reasons that I like to have the tray on some of my feeders. Is the Carolina wrens, who will eat at the suet feeder, as will the 3 previous birds. All of them will eat a little bit of suet once in a while. This bird really likes the suet, but will also feed on the black oil sunflowers, but it doesn't really like to perch on the feeder that much. It's a lot more comfortable feeding with the tray there. So that's why I like to have the tray on some of my feeders. It acts like a platform for them. This is a starling. Mainly what starlings do at my house is they'll feed on the ground, but mostly at the base of the suet feeder or on the suet feeder itself. When starlings come in the springtime, they usually come in a very large number, and I go through a lot of suet pretty quickly. And they really eat a lot once they sit on the feeder. I do have bluebirds. Bluebirds come to the suet feeder, and they're at the base of the suet feeder right now. So the suet feeder is in the tree above them, and the little pieces drop to the ground. They will also land on the suet feeder occasionally. In really cold weather, they'll land on the suet feeder and grab some pieces, but generally they'll feed on the suet on the ground. And I also, as I said, put out the dried mealworms, and they really like the dried mealworms. The robin will also do the same thing as the bluebird. I don't find it on the dried mealworms as much, but occasionally, and then it'll also feed at the base of the suet tree with the suet feeders on it. And they'll also feed, we have winterberry, chokeberry, we have 3 crabapple trees, and my neighbors have some holly bushes, and they'll eat those seeds as well, or those fruits as well. So they'll be attracted to those. The holly, they wait till very late in winter. I don't think it's a highly preferred food, but they'll eat it towards the end of the winter. They'll go after the holly. And we have a flock of house sparrows that seems to find our yard every winter. They generally go away during the year. I don't get them at my feeder too much in the late spring, summer, and early fall, but by the middle of the fall, they're in pretty good numbers. I usually have about 8 to 12 of them in a flock. And they're mostly ground feeders. Occasionally they'll get on the tube feeder, but they really like that white millet, and they'll also eat the black oil sunflower. House finches, of course, also flock to the feeders this time of year on through the winter time. And I can get 15 to 20 at times, and they really go through the seed. They will do a similar thing to the American goldfinch, and what they'll do is they'll get the seed in their bill and they'll turn it around as they crack it. They'll use their tongue to turn it, and they'll crack it all the way around, and then they just drop the husks and eat the meat. And then they'll pick another one and they'll do that again. And they'll sit there for quite a while sometimes, as long as they aren't flushed by another larger bird or another finch that surprises them off the perch. And here you see goldfinch doing that same thing on a black oil sunflower. The goldfinches really like the thistle as well, or Niger seed, but they will eat the black oil sunflower. And again, they put it in their mouth, turn it with their tongue as they crack it, and then just drop the husk and eat the meat that's inside. It's kind of an interesting behavior to watch. It's one of the fun things to watch when you're sitting in your kitchen with a cup of coffee or tea and watching your feeders. You can see them turn that in their bill as they crack it. Juncos have come to town the last few weeks. And again, the white millet, they really like the white millet. I see them eat a lot of white millet, but they'll also eat the black oil sunflower seeds. They don't land as much on the tube feeders, but they like the tray feeders and they like feeding on the ground. And you can see there's quite a few black oil sunflower husks in the yard. I go out about 4 or 5 times through the winter and take a rake, and I rake them all over the yard, spread them out a little bit. I also get white-throated sparrows. They come in about the same time the juncos, so they've been around now for a couple of weeks. And I really kind of enjoy seeing them. It means winter time's around, and they come in pretty good numbers. Sometimes I'll have up to about, if it's snowing out, I'll have up to about 20 juncos, and I might have 10 to 12 white-throated sparrows in the yard. But I do put out 6 tube feeders with black oil and millet, 2 tube feeders with thistle. I have 3 suet feeders and 2 tray feeders. So I have quite a bit of food out there. So it does draw a good number of birds. Occasionally I'll get white-crowned sparrows. And usually it's, as you know, winter's coming on, usually mid-December to through the holidays. I may get 1 or 2 of these that stop by, and it's kind of a lot of fun to all of a sudden look out and see something very different. And what's nice is if you're watching from your house, most of these pictures were taken through the kitchen window or from the porch, and you just get a great view of this bird. You can look at all the field signs on it. What I like about looking at this bird is you see that gray back of the neck. You don't see that in the white-throated sparrow. And the white-crowned sparrow, the lines seem to come together on the back of the head. So you see that outside your house 3 or 4 times, and then you go out into the field and you can see them at different places, and you can really pick up those field signs. That's one thing I like about feeder watching, is you can really see the field marks on the bird because they sit there for quite a while. Song sparrow, again, you can see it's just a beautiful bird if you can sit there and watch it for a while. One of the difficult things sometimes when you're in the field is they hop up on a weed and they dive down below, and they hop up in a bush and they dive down below. And so you kind of, get glimpses of them occasionally. Sometimes you get great views, but certainly if they're in your yard feeding on millet, as this one is, you get some really good views of those field signs that you can take note of. Tree sparrows come in, chipping sparrows are around till about the middle of October or so, and then they seem to leave for the most part. And then about now, the tree sparrows are coming in. And so we get those most of the winter, and then they'll go away and the chipping sparrows will come in. So they kind of trade places with each other. But again, when the birds are sitting there in your yard, feeding on the ground, and again, the sparrows mostly feed on the ground. So that's why I like to have that millet inside the tube feeder, because the finches will knock it onto the ground. The chickadees will knock it onto the ground when they're looking for a sunflower seed, and it feeds these birds. People are starting to see fox sparrows now. We'll see those for about the next month as they pass through. Again, amazing field marks on these birds, just a beautiful warm chestnut color with that gray markings, very bold stripes on the chest. It does have that bold dot on the chest as well occasionally, but it's just a big, hefty bird and just a really pretty bird to see. And again, we see it in the spring when it's going north, and we see it again in the fall when it's coming south, or early winter when it's coming south. So just really nice bird to see outside your window. Again, one of the reasons it's nice to have that tray on the bottom of some of your tube feeders is that cardinals really prefer to sit on that tray and eat. They will try and perch, but they're a little bit big for some of these feeders to be able to perch and then reach around and grab a seed at the same time. But they do like the tray feeders, and they like the tray on the tube feeders. So male on the left, female on the right. And they'll do the same thing. They'll do the same thing that those finches do, is they'll take this seed and they'll turn it in their mouth. And you can see them cracking it with that bill as they turn it in their bill. And then they'll just drop the husk and eat the meat and grab another seed. One of the birds that I don't put out feed for, but comes to the feeder anyway, is the Cooper's hawk. Occasionally I'll get a sharp-shin hawk, but for the last 10 years or so, it's mainly been Cooper's hawks that I've seen around the feeder. And the numbers of Cooper's hawks have really gone up, and sharp-shin numbers seem to be declining a little bit. So, but these are very common at the feeder, and it's really nice when they pose like this for a picture or for a view with your binoculars. You can really tell this is a male Cooper's hawk sitting on your clothesline. And you can see the feeders on each side. And this is a juvenile Cooper's hawk, or immature Cooper's hawk. And again, they pose very nicely right on the clothesline as they're waiting for a bird to make a move. There's caution tape on the clothesline because I have some taller friends that if they're walking around when we have people in the yard, they'll whack their head on this. It's not there to warn the seed-eating birds that there's a Cooper's hawk sitting there. Red-breasted nuthatches are not very common at my feeders unless it's a flight year for them, and it looks like they're going to be around this year. The Finch report not only talks about finches, but it also talks about red-breasted nuthatches. And what they're talking about this year is we may get a good influx of red-breasted nuthatch. So that's a really good bird to look for at your feeder. They really stand out. They're small, but that really blue-gray back and the face and that chestnut or warm orange underneath really has them stand out at your feeder. They're really sharp-looking little birds. So with that finch report, they're talking about us getting more purple finches in the area. There are people that get purple finches year-round in Massachusetts, up in the hill towns, but down here in the valley, we get them occasionally. But when it's a flight year, or when they're down here feeding in our area because there's less food up north, we do get some really good views of them. And I've had like 12 to 15 of them at a time at my feeders. So you'll get a flock of them come in. Again, that raspberry color on the male, and the colors is kind of throughout the bird. If you're looking at a house finch, generally it's around their head, and sometimes down on their chest a little bit, but these seem to be colored all the way through. The female on the right looks a lot like a female rose-breasted grosbeak, with that white over the top of the eye, the white underneath the cheek, and sometimes they even come together and form like a triangle of white from the top to the bottom. But they're a little bit more robust birds. Their beaks are big compared to their heads, which is not as true with a house finch. So they really do stand out, especially if you get to watch them for a while, sitting on the ground or sitting on the feeder. You can really see these field signs. This is one of my two thistle feeders, or Niger feeders, and pine siskins come to it. And there'll be 3 or 4 of them on it sometimes. It's full, there'll be 3 or 4 of them on it sometimes. And you can really see that narrow bill that they have. And that's one of the reasons they like this thistle, is because they can eat it very easily. But they have a very thin bill, and you can see a little bit of the yellow on the wing occasionally, but the streaking is really close together, and they're really a little bit darker finches because of the streaking. They have an overall darker appearance. This bird came a few years ago. We had a flight from the north, an eruption. The birds came down from the north, and I got one of these at my feeder. I'd never seen this at a feeder. I've been doing feeder watching for a little over 40 years. I'd never had one of these at my feeder, and I did have one that year. But common redpoll, not common here, but it could be more common this year. So it's a good thing to look out for. Just that little dark around the face, a little bit of red cap on it, and a little tiny bill. I mean, compared to its head, that's a little tiny finch bill. And they eat tiny seeds. They'll eat seeds. They really like the millet, but they'll also eat, if you have any birches and those birch seeds that hang on through the winter, that's what they'll be up feeding on. So if you do have any birches near your house or where you walk regularly, keep an eye out this winter, because a flock of these will be in birch trees if the finch report is accurate. Another bird that people are already reporting at their feeders, again, it's in the finch report, the evening grosbeaks. The male is on the right, the female's on the left, and they very similar appearance in the head to or shape to a cardinal. They have a very strong finch bill. They really like black oil sunflower, and they like tray feeders as well, or they'll feed on the ground. I don't see them on the tube feeders that often. And again, they're a little bit larger bird for the tube feeder, but the tray feeders and feeding on the ground, you'll see them. And then, of course, in the springtime at my feeder, in come the red-winged blackbirds and the grackles. And they don't come one at a time. They come in fairly large flocks. So when I start to go through like pounds of feed a day, I generally take the feeders down through part of the day. And it kind of discourages them somewhat. And once they start nesting, they don't come to the feeder very much at all. And then once they have their young, they'll come back to the feeder with their young. So it's can be costly to have these guys swarm around your yard. And then, of course, I get these animals occasionally. We don't have them very much in my neighborhood because it's a very busy neighborhood. There's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of people around. So we don't get the bears that come in during the daytime. Mostly it's very early in the morning or in at night or in the evening. They'll come in usually after around 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening, or sometimes middle of the night. And I thought I bring my feeders in when they're around, but I thought I had outsmarted them by hanging this on that green wire that you see in the upper right-hand corner. And it was way up in a tree. It was about 20 feet up in the tree. And then I would lower it, and I'd fill it, and I'd raise it up in the tree, and I hung it on a hook that I had on the tree. And my neighbor has a video of a bear trying to get the feeder, trying to jump up and grab the feeder. And he called me and he said, "You got to see that bear in your backyard. He's doing calisthenics in your backyard. It looks like he's doing jumping jacks." I looked out and we were both laughing. And then a few days later, he figured out where the wire was connected to the tree, and he just pulled the wire right off the tree, and the feeder fell, and he started feeding on that. So I stopped, because once they learn how to do that, they're going to always do it. So. And that's it.
There are a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
What about the squirrels?
Squirrels. The feeder that I put up that I tried to discourage the bears with also discouraged the squirrels, but it was way out on a thin branch. We have a few large trees in our yard. It was way out on a thin branch, and it was too far down from that branch for them to like slide down the wire. So they couldn't get to it. I never saw a squirrel on that. So that's one thing you can do. Some people run a wire all the way across their yard, and then they try to put things on the wire to prevent the squirrel from walking out the wire to get to the feeder. They're very difficult to discourage, very difficult.
Someone mentioned red pepper suet. What do you think about that?
Yeah, they do have what they call, not really anti-squirrel, but squirrel proof mixes. And some of them have the red pepper spray on them, or they use a lot of if you use a lot of safflower seed, they don't like that. That's another thing they've tried to discourage squirrels with. But yeah, they're just really difficult to discourage. It's been an ongoing debate.
How about the bears? Will they go after the white millet?
Yes. Yep. They will. Yeah, it's not, I mean, they won't prefer it. They really like suet and the black oil because of the high fat content. That's what they're looking for, especially in the fall. They're looking for a lot of fat. And so they've carried off my suet feeders occasionally. And, sometimes I find them, sometimes sometimes I don't find them, and other times I find them, but they're destroyed beyond recognition. So that'll happen to you. Fortunately, suet feeders aren't very expensive, but like I said, I do bring them in now a lot from mid-March to mid-December. So mid-December to mid-March, I'll leave them out unless the bears come, and then I'll start taking them in again. So
now, where is the Finch report? You referred to the Finch report.
Yeah, it's online. I don't really know the URL for it, but if you Google Northern Finch Report or Finch Report, it should come up. I know people send it to me once in a while. I know my brother sends it to me when he gets it. Some people are look for it. I thought Monday Morning Bird people sent it out at one point. The Hampshire Bird Club has been known to send it out to members, their member list for emails. But yeah, I would try and Google it.
Okay. There are no more questions, but some people are reporting some birds in their yard. Looks like Carol's yard is jumping. She's got a red-breasted nuthatch, Carolina wren, a flock of crows.
Great.
So sounds like things are coming in.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Keep your eye out for some of those winter finches because they should be in the red-breasted nuthatches have been around since July. For some reason, they came down to our area. I've been getting them here on the west side of East Hampton. They've been pretty numerous along Nash Hill Road up in Williamsburg. When people have gone up there looking for the red crossbills, they found red-breasted nuthatches along that road. They've been some at Arcadia and couple of Nonotuck Park in East Hampton. We've heard them there. So they've been around since July in good numbers. So we're thinking we might get a number of them on the Christmas bird count this year.
Okay, here's another question. Does it matter what kind of suet to use? Peanut, fruit, nut?
Yeah, I usually get the packaged one that has some seed in it. It's the square packaged ones, but I don't generally go for the flavored ones. I know they make a lot of different ones now, but I just get the square blocks. I used to get suet at the butcher's, and I'm thinking about doing that again because that's just pure suet. It doesn't have anything else in it. And some of the suet that they sell you through bird stores and online can handle warmer temperatures. Whereas if you get suet at the butcher's, it can start melting and it also can go bad. So the blocks seem to be a good way to go.
Okay, here's a recommendation from Cheryl about the squirrels. She spent $80 on a squirrel buster suet feeder and it really works.
Oh, all right.
Can you attract crossbills to the feeder? Like if you wanted crossbills at your feeder, what would you do? Right. No, I don't know.
Crossbill's bill is built for opening pine and spruce and fir cones. And so they actually pry the cone open with that crossed bill and then pull the seed out from the inside with their tongue. Most of our seeds aren't made for their bill. And so I know people have had them at sunflower before, but they just have a really hard time opening a sunflower because their bill's just not built for it. They're very specialist feeders.
Is it necessary to put out thistle seed for certain species?
Pine siskins and goldfinches will eat black oil sunflower. But they get even more excited about thistle. It's not necessary to do thistle. It's expensive. It goes bad quickly.
David said that he spent the summer pulling random thistle plants. So put a lot of work into that.
Now there's an industrious person. Yeah. So I think what I found is when I tried to keep it from one year to the next, they won't come to it. They won't eat it. And I don't know if it goes bad or it sours or they just know it's last year's model and they don't want it. I don't know what the problem is, but they won't. It it doesn't hold up very long. It'll hold up throughout the winter, but then if you try and, stretch it into the spring or fall or spring or summer, they stay away from it.
Here's another suggestion for the squirrels. I found that attaching a metal slinky to the bottom of the feeder deterred squirrels.
Ah,
So
that's a really
that's
good
a-
idea.
Yeah. How about peanuts? Are peanuts okay?
Oh, peanuts are great. Woodpeckers really like peanuts. Pileated and red-bellied especially will eat peanuts, but so will squirrels. And blue jays, I know blue jays will as well. And chipmunks, of course.
Okay. Here's
So-
another crossbill question. Can they manage sunflower hearts in a platform feeder?
Oh, I bet they can. That's a really good thought. Didn't think about that before. Sure. Because then they don't have to break it open. They can just pop it in their mouth. It's like fast food for a bird.
There are no more questions. If anyone has any other questions, just put them in the chat. Okay, I think we're all set. No more questions.
All
Great.
right, great.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. It was great.
Welcome.
Yeah, it was very good.
Thank
Oh,
you.
Wait
Thank
a
you,
minute.
Janet.
Here's a question, last minute question here. How did you first get involved with birding? So it's a personal question here.
It was the mid-70s, and I was out in Washington State, and a flock of evening grosbeaks came to our yard and were feeding on sunflowers in the garden. And I thought somebody's flock of parrots had gotten out. So I looked them up in a book and I realized, wow, there's a lot of really interesting birds out there. So I started watching them and putting feeders out. And then when I moved back here, because I grew up in this area, when I moved back here, I just kept doing it. I did it for a number of years out in Washington State and then came back here and kept doing it. So it was a lot of fun. And then when I came back here in '83, my brother and I started doing, because he was into bird watching as well at that point, we started doing the Christmas bird count here in Northampton and then expanded to Greenfield, and we were doing one in Connecticut, and then we have been doing the Greenfield count as well for years, and the Quabbin count. So we're down to 3. We decided to stick to 3 counts. We were up to 5 at one point, but our holidays were totally taken in Christmas bird counts. So
A couple of people have mentioned that the tufted titmice, that they love peanuts.
all right. Yeah.
Um,
Yep. Yeah, and you can get the shelled peanuts or the ones in the shell. And blue jays, I know, will take the ones in the shell and take them off somewhere and open them up and eat them.
And you got a few thank yous here for a great presentation. So
No, all right.
Yeah.
Well, you're welcome.
All right, good night. Thanks, everybody.
all right.
Hey,
Thank you.
bye.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
You're welcome.